Growing up, I loved ghost stories. I loved reading them. I loved watching, chiller theater and monster movies on TV. And I was always in demand as the kid who could tell, was a really good ghost storyteller. And as I got older, that was just kind of what I wanted to do. There was this sort of nihilism that fueled the punk scene, and that was something that was very much a part of what I grew up with, growing up as a kid with the Cold War going on and hearing the air raid sirens going off when I was very young. You really had a sense of that the world could implode at any minute, the world was going to end. Theodore Rothke has a poem where he says, "The edge is what I have, the edge is all I have." I'm very interested in exploring that edge, and I'm very interested in people, and especially artists, who kind of live on that edge and having that perspective on the world. I just find the whole act of creativity to be very mysterious. I still don't know where it comes from. There's this whole element of transcendence that I think you find in the best art. And so, because it's not something I really can understand or explain, I'm just continually drawn back to it. So I'm going to read from the opening of Available Dark, which, as Margarita just said, the central character narrator is Cass Cassandra Neary, who basically went off the rails some years ago, right here in this part of New York City, and has never gotten back on the rails again. And this is from the opening of the book, which is set here, so I thought I would read that. Most of the novel actually takes place in Reykjavik, after a brief stopover in Helsinki. So this is from Available Dark. There had been more trouble as usual. In November, I'd headed north to an island off the coast of Maine, hoping to score an interview that might jumpstart the cold wreckage of my career as a photographer, dead for more than 30 years. Instead, I got sucked into some seriously bad shit. The upshot was that I was now back in the city, almost dead broke, with winter coming down and even fewer prospects than when I'd left weeks earlier. I dealt with this the way I usually did. I bought a bottle of Jack Daniels, cranked my stereo, and got hammered. When I finally came to, it was dark. Sleet rattled against a greasy window. In a corner of the apartment, a red light flashed beside a stack of old LPs. I lurched toward the blinking light, unsure if it was early morning or night, yesterday or tomorrow. Beep. Cass, what the hell did you do? I rubbed my eyes, my head throbbing. Don't know how you got that photo of my mother, but you better call me first. Sheriff Stone wants to talk to you, also that guy Wheeler from Beep. I hit erase and skipped to the next caller. This is a message for Cassandra Neary from investigator Jonathan Wheeler of the Maine State. Beep. I erased that one too. And all the rest without listening to them, just for good measure. Then I took a shower, waiting for 10 minutes before the water pressure amped up to a scalding trickle. That's what 30-odd years in a rent-stabilized apartment on the Lower East Side will buy you. Back in the day, my nickname had been Scary Neary. Most of the people who call me that are dead now. No direct causal relationship. Just bad drugs and worse luck. I'm nearly 6 feet tall, all speed-fused nerves and ragged, dirty blonde hair, with a fresh scar beside my right eye. A walking ad for Just Say No. Yeah, I like bleak places, I guess. I love very bleak places, and the place where I live is although it's very, very beautiful, it's also very raw, and the people there are also kind of bleak. I mean, I think a lot of them would agree with that assessment. And I don't know. When I wrote Generation Loss, it was the first time that I was sort of writing way out of my comfort zone in terms of writing a novel that had no fantastical or supernatural element whatsoever in it. And that, to me, I realized when I wrote Generation Loss, I was sort of for the first time, I was working without a net. Although my work increasingly over the previous years to completing that book had kind of been moving away to being mostly realistic fiction. But And what I found was that in describing the main landscape, and again in describing the landscape in Iceland in Available Dark, that was sort of where I would find kind of, it sounds like a hokey way of putting it, but that's sort of where I would find the magic. That's where I would find the part of the story where normally, you know, there might have been some flicker of the fantastic there. And having taken that away, you know, having removed that from my skill set, what was left was sort of trying to write about this very, very bleak and often kind of frightening and sinister place in a way that would make it seem beautiful. I found Iceland to be a very, very sinister place when I was there. I found it very deeply unsettling, which I was not expecting the first time I was there. I went there twice, and the first time down on the harbor and just looking across the water at this, you know, this mountain range that was there, and I just was like, why the fuck would anyone want to live here? Because it just I've never before had the sense that I just reached the end of the world. And I kind of felt like that when I first moved to Maine. So it was, I don't know, I think there's just something, a certain beauty in this really harsh, kind of unfriendly place that for whatever reason I responded to. And for many years I've had editors and my agents saying they really wanted me to write a mainstream novel. And when I started writing the book that eventually became Generation Loss, it was not a crime novel. It was something very, very different. So the second book, so Available Dark, was a bit easier to write in some ways, except for having to go to Iceland. I love film noir. I love like that kind of film. I was never a big reader of mysteries because I find, I would read them, but I always found them so very conventional and repetitive and very formulaic. And also, you know, very reliant on things like coincidence and stuff. And I actually, you know, have somebody who's written science fiction and fantasy, and people, you know, science fiction and fantasy don't get no respect. And people are always like, oh, this is, you know, none of this shit could ever happen in the real world. This is not realistic. But reading a lot of mystery novels and thrillers, I feel like this is totally ridiculous. You know, the stuff, I mean, the things that they would expect you to believe in terms of happening in a real, you know, in our world, to me, I thought I didn't buy that at all. So I was actually trying to write a book that would be more like what I imagined it would be really like if something like this happened, which would be that, you know, things would not neatly resolve, that, you know, the character would fuck up a lot of stuff, that she's not like Nancy Drew trying to solve this mystery. She's just kind of stumbling along and stuff is happening and she's stuck, you know, she's stuck on this island, so she just doesn't really have anything else to do. So I wasn't trying, you know, conscious of trying to do something different, but I was conscious of the fact that I did not want to write something that would sort of cohere to books that I had read that I didn't care for. But I did like some Scandinavian literature, and that stuff seemed much different and in some ways less formulaic than American and British things. I'm making a sweeping generalization, because there are actually a lot of, like Ruth Rendell and Barbara Vine and Patricia Highsmith. You know, there are a lot of mystery writers whose work I like a lot. But I thought Smilla's Sense of Snow was a brilliant novel in that it had a heroine who was just kind of, or anti-heroine, sort of following her nose. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. I love Seattle. Seattle is the only place I draw a crowd. Seattle and Finland, so I'm always happy to go to those two places. I'm basically a geek. So I'm interested in things, and when I was a kid, I was really fascinated by entomology and lepidoptery, and you know, they were things that I immersed myself in as a child that I still find interesting. And I worked for about 8 years at the National Air and Space Museum of the Smithsonian, and I worked in their photo archives. And part of my job, I worked in their darkroom. And a lot of the job was extremely tedious. And because it was government work, there were a lot of people who were on payroll with a lot of time that they were happy to spend teaching me about photography. So I had this great opportunity to kind of learn about photography, and the part of it that I loved was being in the darkroom. Unfortunately, I found tragically that I myself was not a good photographer. And this was all black and white photography, it wasn't color photography. But I kind of learned enough to be dangerous. I learned enough that I knew about the techniques. And the rest of it, I just, do what one does nowadays. You read about it, I Google it and find books about it and things like that. Find people who are much more knowledgeable than me and steal their wisdom. But it's actually a lot easier to do with a noir novel, with a thriller, because I think because there's a template there and there are certain conventions that you can follow. Basically, somebody's got to be dead. That the protagonist has to be threatened with death. You have to find something out. That there's sort of different plot points that you can tick off. So I kind of cheat when I write those books. I still don't know what I'm doing when I write anything else. Basically, I've written so many different things in so many different genres. Probably a dozen different ones over 25 years. And I did it because I wanted to do it and because I grew up, as probably some people here of my age or older did, where you would just kind of read everything. So from my perspective, you could write a science fiction novel and then you could also write the great American novel. And you could do all of these things. My role model, believe it or not, was Noel Coward, who did all of these things, and I thought, I want to do that. I want to try all these different things. And basically, publishers want you to write the same thing or have something, written for the same audience over and over and over again, at least until you gain traction, you gain enough readers. And I think now, if I had to do it over again, I would probably go back and try to write, stick with something long enough. But I just have a very, really and truly, a low boredom threshold. And I would do something, and it's not like I felt like, okay, I perfected that, but I would do it and think, I want to try something different. And I like to, when I finished Generation Loss, the first thing I wrote after that was a story called Winter's Wife, which is a very straightforward fantasy story. And I was like, oh, thank God, it's the elves. Really, I was like, I was so happy. I thought, I'm writing about elves again. This is great. So it was a great relief to go back to that, not just because of the tone was different and not so dark, but because I really do love writing about that. I love that. There's a certain, as I'm sure those of you in the audience who are writers know, there's a certain frisson that you get, I think, from writing, Fantastica that you don't get from writing mainstream fiction, or I don't get it anyway. But thank you very much.